spring forward. Our opening words are from the writings of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i religious tradition. The time must come when the necessity for holding a vast, all-embracing assemblage of humankind will be universally recognized. The rulers and kings of the earth must attend it, and participating in its deliberations must consider such ways and means as will lay the foundations of the world's great peace among all humanity. Such a peace demands that the great powers should resolve, for the sake of tranquility of the peoples, to be fully reconciled among themselves. And if this is done, the nations of the world will no longer require any armaments or weapons. It is thus not for them to pride themselves who love their own country, but rather for them who love the whole world. For the earth is but one country, and all humankind its citizens. Please join with me for our first hymn, number 358, Rank by Rank. Again we stand.
join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. And while you're standing, turn and say hello to someone you may not yet know. Okay, enough of that. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, of course, those who are here for the very first time. Welcome those of you who have been here forever. Welcome, Josh Leach, back again. We'll be having a special collection to supply Josh with a coat and tie. Josh, if you do not know, was our student here a year ago. He was here for 2 years, and Josh is now working full-time for the UU Service Committee, about which you will hear much more very soon. Josh, among other things, is raising money for the Service Committee, and there is an envelope in your order of service encouraging all of us to become members of UUSC. Dana McLean Greeley once said that in order to be a Unitarian Universalist, you should support 3 things. You should support your own congregation, and just by the way, next Sunday is Stewardship Sunday, so you'll hear about that. And you should support the Unitarian Universalist Association, and by being a member of this congregation, you indeed support the UUA. And Dana Greeley said you should also be affiliated with the UU Service Committee. The UU Service Committee is what puts into action our values, our faith in action. And so, welcome, Josh. It's good to have you here. He is a peripatetic spokesperson and was in Dallas, Texas, preaching last Sunday, and who knows where else you've been. So welcome, Josh. And by the way, we do have another student coming next fall. We have recently entered into an agreement with a Meadville Lombard student who grew up in Franklin, Massachusetts, and her name is Jennifer Johnson. And she'll be with us 2 years part-time, and sometime this spring we'll have a chance to introduce ourselves to her. And wasn't it like getting up in the middle of the night this morning with the time change? That's ridiculous. Why are we doing that sort of thing? But in any case, I'm glad to see you here, and we'll pay attention to see who walks in the door at 11 o'clock. All kinds of things are going on around here. There will be a discussion of the service, and I think that that will take place here in the sanctuary from 11:30 till 12, because at that same time there is an opening in the gallery upstairs, and so you may want to check out that gallery opening, and there is an insert about that in your order of service as well. Also, after church, there will be an introduction to our partnership with Transylvania and the pilgrimage that we will have end of June and beginning of July. And if you're curious about that, members of our partner church committee will talk about the plans for that pilgrimage, and you're all welcome to come and check that out. And there are also baked potatoes being sold to support the partner church work. And today, since you're spending the day here anyway, there is a forum about religious education taking place here in the common room at 4 o'clock, from 4 to 6, and we hope as many of you will participate in that. And there is a schedule and various other announcements in the order of service. And just by the way, as I look at the upcoming things this week, I want to call attention to Wednesday evening. Julie Gillette has been doing a series of meditation and mindfulness evenings. And that is a well-kept, amazing secret around here, because Julie Gillette is a rock star when it comes to doing mindfulness and meditation. She is the coordinator of Buddhist students at Harvard Divinity School, for crying out loud. So come check that out, and it really is a worthwhile evening and introduction to meditation and mindfulness. And one final thing, many of you know that in support of our guest in Sanctuary, we have had a crowdfunding campaign called Faithify that just closed last night. Its initial goal was $10,000, and we surpassed that goal, and then the stretch goal was $15,000, and when it closed last night, we were at $14,936. So it's been an extraordinary event, and just great appreciation to everybody's participation in that. And let's get on with the show, and Lisa Rubin, with some assistance, is doing the time for all ages.
Hi, this is Fiona. So during the month of February, when we weren't having regular classes, we were doing some Black History Month stuff. And during that time, we learned about a man named, what was his name?
Lewis Latimer.
Lewis Latimer. Can you raise your hand if you've ever heard of Lewis Latimer? Oh, we're going to teach them something today, aren't we? Yes. So, well, let's see. Why don't you start? Tell me something that happened to Lewis Latimer's parents.
His parents were runaway slaves and people kept them safe.
His parents were runaway slaves. Where? What city?
Boston.
Boston. So in Boston, when people came to bring his father, George, back down south, the people formed a wall all the way around, I think it was the jail, the area where he was being held, so that the slave catchers couldn't come and get him, right? And Lewis Latimer, Lewis Latimer invented things, didn't he? And what did he do? How did he learn how to invent things?
He learned how to draw inventions.
He learned how to draw inventions, and he worked in a patent company. Let's see, and one of the things that we're really lucky that he helped invent was a better
Light bulb.
A better light bulb, because the light bulb that Thomas Edison invented had paper filament, and that light bulb only lasted for 4 days. So what did Lewis Latimer do?
He put a better thread in the light bulb.
A better thread. Do you remember what it was called?
No. Carbon filament?
Carbon filament. He invented the carbon filament. And then light bulbs, now they stay light all the time, right? Okay, and he did other things. Lewis Latimer did some other things. He helped with other inventions. Let's see, and he invented some things himself. So, what's something that we use that he helped in after it was invented? What did he help with?
He helped Alexander Graham Bell invent the telephone.
Wow, right? And he invented the first what to keep us comfortable in the summer?
Air conditioner.
And where did he put toilets?
On trains.
So you can thank Lewis Latimer for that. Oh, cute face. And let's see. Then I asked Fiona, what are things that especially interested her about Lewis Latimer? So why don't you tell us some of that?
He was an artist, he was a musician, he wrote a play, and he writes poetry.
Wow. And then there was one other thing that, there's lots of things that you can look up about Lewis Latimer. We'll tell you about that in a moment. But he helped found a Unitarian church, right? And it was a Unitarian church, and now it is the UU Church in Flushing, New York, and it's called the Unitarian Universalist Church Congregation of
Queens.
And you think that's funny, don't you?
Uh-huh.
She thought that was funny that it says Queens. So when we were studying about Lewis Latimer, we had different workshops going on in different rooms, learning different things. And one little group, which was Fiona and Sula and Tristan. Look at Tristan, give us a big wave. Can you wave? Yay, Tristan, right. And Sula Gillette. And we cut out lots and lots of pictures of
light bulbs.
And we used it as a background for a poster. You want to hold this up for everybody to see? A poster all about Lewis Latimer. Can you show everybody? And we're going to frame it. And it has more information about him on there for you to see. And it will be hanging somewhere in the
church.
And that's our story about Lewis Latimer for you today. Now you know something too.
And now is a good time for kids and teachers to go off to your in-gathering. And as you do, we will sing Our World is One World. It is number 134.
This reading comes from a poem by the Marshall Islands writer Kathy Jitneel Kitchener. As you may know, UUSC has a program to partner with communities who are on the front lines of experiencing climate change-induced forced migration. And my colleague, Salote Sokwa, was actually present at the UN Climate Summit in 2014, where this poem was first read and presented in full. The poet is speaking to her daughter here. Dear Matafele Penam, they say that you, your daughter, and your granddaughter too, will wander rootless, with only a passport to call home. Dear Matafele Penam, don't cry. Mommy promises you, no one's drowning, baby. No one's moving. No one's losing their homeland. No one's gonna become a climate change refugee. Or should I say, no one else. To the Carteret Islanders of Papua New Guinea and to the Taro Islanders of the Solomon Islands, I take this moment to apologize to you. We are drawing the line here. Because, baby, we are going to fight. Your mommy, daddy, Bubu Jima, your country, and your president, too, we will all fight. Freely we receive, freely may we give. To support the good work of this congregation within these walls and far, far beyond. The offering will now be gratefully received. Well, it is wonderful to be back. It feels like any given Sunday. Thank you for this opportunity. To all of you who know me well from my time as student minister, there are two things about this coming sermon that will probably not surprise you. The first is that between the time I submitted the blurb for the sermon and the time I actually wrote it, it changed into something different, but hopefully something still relevant. The second thing that will not surprise you probably is that when I wrote the first draft of the sermon, it was way too excruciatingly long. But fortunately, I had the chance to preach it last weekend in Dallas, where they do both a 10 a.m. and an 11:30 service. And the great thing about this setup is that you get an immediate do-over after you've realized the first time through where all of the boring parts are. So the sermon you will hear today has been shrunk several times in the wash. Here goes. There is a passage in the New Testament. Jesus says, "Whoever tries to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life will preserve it." As with many things in that book, it's perhaps best not to take this too literally. Let's just say that Jesus seems to be saying something about fear and courage. He's saying that it is only when we are willing to risk what we hold dear, even our own lives, that we can preserve what really matters, and that we lose it when we act through fear of loss. Now, I happen to know something about fear. I am a fearful person. And as such, it seems to me rather unfair of Jesus to issue a warning to the fearful. We're not really the ones who need warning. We're already afraid, in case you couldn't tell. Over the course of my work with UUSC, however, I've begun to realize that Jesus may have had a point about this, which is what I want to talk to you about today. First, though, I am afraid I have not yet fully conveyed just how fearful I can be. I'm afraid of subways, I'm afraid of planes, I'm afraid that my cell phone battery will run out at an inopportune moment, and I'm utterly terrified of the possibility of a car tire being blown and being stranded somewhere in a strange city. So much so that I have had to come up with a new diagnosis for myself. I call it psychosomatic deflationary syndrome. This is when I become so terrified at the possibility that I will have a flat tire that I convince myself that I do in fact have one. So I obtained a rental car in Dallas last Friday. I was traveling on a development trip for UUSC, and I'd arrived in the city a day early to avoid the nor'easter that was bearing down on us here in Boston. I got on the highway hoping to see some of my childhood haunts, having grown up in nearby Coppell, and when, after about 30 seconds after getting behind the wheel, I felt ever so slight a tremor beneath me, I thought, "No, Josh, that's just you being paranoid. That's your psychosomatic deflationary syndrome kicking in." I drove on. The vibration of the steering wheel got worse. "No, Josh," I thought, "that can't be a flat tire. It would be too terrible and ridiculous for your worst fear to come true in the first 30 seconds of driving this rental car in the middle of a Dallas highway." The vibration turned into a steady rocking of the steering wheel. Then I heard the telltale flippity-floppity sound of completely busted and airless rubber. I finally pulled over. I found myself in an empty parking lot where they seemed to be demolishing whatever building was behind me. What on earth do I do now, I thought. I couldn't possibly tell UUSC what had happened. Development would never invite me to anything again. I had just dealt some potentially expensive damage to a vehicle that had been rented for me, ideally in the hope that I would be using it to actually raise funds for the organization, not to deplete them horribly. I was at a loss. It is not the first time in my work with UUSC this year that I have felt this way, and it will probably not be the last. In a more serious way, work in the human rights movement in general often involves confronting one's worst fears. But this is perhaps especially true in moments like the present. Many times this last year, we have felt as if we were confronting our nightmares come to life. Perhaps especially people involved in the fight for immigrant rights or refugee rights have felt that everything that was once relatively safe, every hard-won advance of the last few years, is suddenly at risk. This previous summer, for instance, none of us yet knew what would be the fate of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program, which enabled some 800,000 undocumented young people to live and work freely in this country. The incoming administration had not yet moved to cancel it, despite announcing plans to do so on the campaign trail. This inaction was grasped at as one of the few straws of hope. Many people breathed a sigh that DACA, at least, might be safe. This began to change due to a letter dated June 29, 2017, sent by the Attorney General of my home state of Texas. A quick sidebar here that I do love Texas. I grew up there, and my sister and I can both attest that you can't escape a Texas childhood without developing a fierce and largely irrational state pride. But they were not kidding when they said that everything is bigger in Texas. That can mean a bigger heart, like we see every day at UUSC in the work of our partners in Texas, like Grassroots Leadership in Austin or Raíces in San Antonio, which is helping people to renew their DACA status who are displaced by Hurricane Harvey right now. But it can also mean a bigger kind of nasty. In this June 29th letter, Texas AG Ken Paxton informed the White House that if they did not abolish the DACA program by September 5th, then they, along with 10 states, would sue to bring about this result. It was a devastatingly logical plan. By bringing the case in Texas, these AGs had almost guaranteed that the judge who'd hear the case would be the same one who'd put a similar initiative, DAPA, on hold in 2015. And if he did so again, the only hope for DACA would be from long and drawn-out litigation. And we didn't expect this White House to defend the program in court. The mood of fear and powerlessness was hard to escape. As the September 5th ultimatum drew closer, we at UUSC received a call to action from a coalition that included our partners at the Undocu Black Network. Led by the National Korean American Service and Educational Consortium, or NAKASEC, they had organized a 22-day nonstop vigil in front of the White House in the lead up to the DACA deadline. They were asking allied organizations to adopt one of the 22 days to give their folks some relief. I was fired up to commit UUSC to hosting one of these vigil days. No sooner had I done so, however, than all my fears again kicked into high gear. I was afraid of what would happen on September 5th. I was afraid of how we would find enough speakers. True, we had some ministers lined up to do readings. We'd collected solidarity statements from across the country, but the tone of what we'd prepared still felt mournful. I didn't know how to keep up our collective spirits. As soon as we arrived, however, I realized I'd gotten it wrong. The vigil, which was led largely by Korean, American, and Latinx young people, many of whom had DACA status, was in its 20th day by this point, with vigilers going nonstop for 24 hours a day. I was expecting signs of exhaustion, or at the very least of flagging energy, but no. The solution they had found was simple. The young people had set up an enormous speaker at the vigil site that was blasting multi-generational dance classics from I Will Survive to Despacito. We all swayed and jived and did line dances with our DACA signs for the next 72 hours, and we still didn't want to stop. In the end, I didn't have the heart to break it up for a reading of our solidarity statements. Apparently, it turned out serious did not have to mean somber, and one could double down on joy in the face of tragedy. It was a small but important object lesson for me in the wisdom of UUSC's grassroots partnership model. This model is based in the insight that the solutions arise from the people most directly impacted. I, coming down from Boston, had convinced myself that I needed to come up with new ways to fill the time to inject some new direction. I was forgetting what they teach you on day one at UUSC. Learn from the work already underway. Follow their lead on the ground and the answer will emerge. This is eye-to-eye partnership 101. So that was lesson one for me, I guess, in the art of confronting fear. Ask for help. Recognize that it is not actually all on you. This is the solution I eventually found to my highway flat tire problem as well. I called Kate Friedman, my colleague from UUSC. Help, I said. I swear this kind of thing doesn't happen to me all the time, I said, thinking about the moose I almost hit on the road that one time, and the flooding in my basement, and realizing that actually this kind of thing does happen to me all the time. But Kate, it turns out, is the person you want to have in your corner when this sort of thing goes down. In no time, she had us behind the wheel of a new rental with the car company apologizing to us for the flat tire. Often when we approach a new challenge, we do just the opposite of asking for help. We assume at first that we need to be the ones to come up with a solution, especially if we feel we're coming from a place of relative privilege or safety, as I often do. We may believe that it is our role to provide comfort or solace. After all, what right do we have to despair? This is an immensely isolating feeling. It's a huge load to take onto one's own shoulders to believe that oneself alone must know the answer, that oneself alone must be immune to grief. Inevitably, we come to be overwhelmed by the responsibility of this, and then we retreat in fear. We withdraw. But this withdrawal does not defeat fear. It makes it more powerful. By an irresistible logic, every time we give in to fear, we make it harder to show courage the next. This is what Norman Mailer refers to in one of his novels as the implacable law of fear. It has to be conquered, he writes, or it collects, then invades one's dreams. When we were driving back to the rental car place on Friday, I said to Kate, well, now I think I'm just cursed. Maybe I shouldn't try to drive here at all. She was having none of this. You have to get back in the saddle, she said. Go drive wherever you were planning to go before this flat tire thing happened. She was trying to make sure that I didn't give in to the implacable law of fear. This, then, is lesson number 2. You have to walk toward what you fear rather than away from it. You may think you can't because you assume that as soon as you do so, you'll be overwhelmed by fear. But it is actually and paradoxically only in this moment that we find our courage. Back in December, our partners and allies again put out a call to come to D.C. DACA had long since been canceled, and Congress had dithered and punted and still failed to come up with a solution for the 800,000 people whose lives had been thrown into turmoil and jeopardy. Since the last time, therefore, the situation had gotten even more dire. So our partners asked us to dare a little bit more. This time, we were asked to stand in civil disobedience on the Capitol steps and risk arrest for blocking the way in order to send a message to our legislators. Once again, I was afraid. I'd never been arrested or done civil disobedience before. In my time here at Bedford, I was not the first to come forward to join those of you who put yourselves on the line to halt pipeline construction. Truth be told, I was afraid. I dreaded the prospect of losing my freedom, if only for a few hours. I was aware then, in the lead up to the DC action, of the distance that lay between the ideals I'd long expressed and the act of trying to live them out. Throughout all of human history, it's been clear that resistance to injustice requires sacrifice. But I was realizing how frightened I was at the reality of sacrifice. And then I thought, if I was this afraid, where was anyone else going to find the courage? After all, I was relatively insulated from harm in the event of arrest compared to most of the people actually leading this movement, including our partners. I, for one, was not at risk of deportation. Somehow or other, I managed to get myself and my UUSC signs to DC. On the day of, as I palely waited for the instructions to start moving onto the Capitol steps, I realized that in my alarm, I had forgotten to eat breakfast. I was only able to keep on my two quivering legs by the well-timed provision of a bran muffin by one of my supervisors at UUSC, Meredith Larson. I here refer you back to Lesson 1 about asking for help. When we were finally seated on the Capitol steps, however, and the police were taking us into custody one by one, my fear evaporated. I realized that I was surrounded by hundreds of strong people who were putting themselves on the line for their own or a loved one's future, and that whatever was going to happen to me would happen to all of us together. So I am proud to say, as a result, I have now joined the proud tradition here at Bedford of having a rap sheet to my name. And here is the proof, complete with fingerprint. I saw that once again I had gotten things backward. It's actually not distance from the struggle that gives you courage to sacrifice, but proximity to it. I could begin to understand why it is so often the people who have the most reason to fear who ultimately display the most courage. I have a partial theory for why this is so. Withdrawal from the struggle yields an exaggerated fear of loss. When we are too ensconced in privilege and security, we start to harbor illusions of immortality. We think we can preserve everything so long as we risk nothing. But when we are confronted each day by the reality of loss, when we see firsthand the evanescence of things, then we value all the more those people and principles that really count, and we become ready to sacrifice for them. That is the truth of the New Testament saying with which we began. UUSC's partners around the world live constantly in the presence of the threatened loss of human rights. And for that very reason, they show the ultimate courage. In Burma, our partners risk murder and torture from their own police and military for bringing humanitarian aid to IDP camps where Rohingya people are interned. In the Pacific, our partners are resisting rising sea levels and soil erosion due to climate change, all the while insisting that the world must not call them refugees because they will not allow themselves and their families to be displaced. Here in the United States, the Undocu Black Network led last week a civil disobedience at Speaker Paul Ryan's office to demand a halt to escalating assaults on immigrant communities and a Clean Dream Act. They faced arrest, as I had, except that they risked far more in doing so because they did their action without the dual unearned protections in this society of a white skin and a U.S. passport. Those are two lessons, at least, that I have learned about fear from my time at UUSC. And I am applying those two lessons coming before you today. First, I am asking for your help. We can't do this alone. When we retreat from one another, we do nothing except make ourselves more powerless and strengthen the forces we're trying to resist. So let's do this together. In preparation for coming to this service, we at UUSC looked up Bedford in our UUSC database, and no surprise, this congregation is a very strong group of supporters. 61 of you are currently UUSC members. You've contributed generously to emergency response funds for the crisis in Burma, Haiti, and elsewhere, including over $4,500 to the earthquake in Nepal. Imagine, though, what we can accomplish if we double that membership today. Every one of you here who is not already a UUSC member can become one today. You can find a membership envelope in your order of service, and I will show you what it looks like. This is the one here. Or you can also pick one up at the UUSC booth after the service in the common room. Join us by giving a gift to UUSC in any amount. Remember that a donation of $125 or more will be matched by the Shelter Rock congregation, so you have the power to double your gift. You can pass your envelopes back to myself or my colleague Katrina Veer at Community Hour, or talk to us there about other ways to get involved and learn more. We are only as mighty as the number of us who can join together. That is how we realize our values in the world. And, as Kate said to me before I came here this weekend, Josh, if you can't recruit members at Bedford, of all places, what good are you? So I am asking you to become a UUSC member today. Second, I am asking you to resist the implacable law of fear. Now, this congregation, of course, knows something about how to do that. You know about how to get closer to the struggle and take action on behalf of human rights. You can join a justice education trip through the College of Social Justice. You can sign up for advocacy updates and other ways to get involved with UUSC through our website, uusc.org. Walk into the struggle, and you may find hope. Walk into the fear, and you may find courage. I want to leave you with the words of the great human rights advocate, Archbishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador, commenting on the gospel verse with which we began. Quote, "Every person ought to want to live intensely. Many do not understand. They think the church should not be involved in such things. But to the contrary, you have just heard in the words of the gospel that one must not love oneself so much as to avoid getting involved in the risks of life that history demands of us. And that those who try to fend off the danger will lose themselves, while those who give themselves to the service of others will live." May it be so. Please join me in our final hymn, number 299, "Make Channels for the Streams of Love."